Breath of the Wild is easily one of the greatest games I've ever played. Everything about it, from the minimalist, astounding presentation to the excellent game design, it's all fantastic. I know the story might have been a letdown, but truth be told, the gameplay carries the experience and elevates its quality to a tremendously high level. I like the open-ended nature of the world of Hyrule, where the places you could go were virtually limitless. Despite constant messages from Zelda telling me to come save her, I found myself engrossed by the possibilities of where I could go, what I could see, and what I would encounter. The experience was strung together by loose narrative threads that would never really force you to follow through with them immediately. You could take your time. This non-linearity is what some consider to be the antithesis of what Skyward Sword was, a game renowned for its linear game design. Breath of the Wild seems to harken back to the progression found in the original NES title, essentially making this an authentic quote-unquote Zelda experience. Regardless, this was the type of game I always wanted more out of when I completed all the shrines, all the divine beasts, defeated the totally unexpected final boss, and explored every nook and cranny until the sound of yahas was ingrained in my mind. Because of this, I was extraordinarily excited to see Nintendo develop some DLC to expand the scope of what Breath of the Wild already offers, which is like 40 plus hours of enjoyment. This is one of the only times I'm comfortable saying DLC is welcome, because Battlefront is already pretty developed and feels finished. The DLC wasn't just a quick cash grab to complete a rushed game. It fits the definition of an expansion. Much like the whole theme of Battlefront going back to its Zelda roots, the DLC felt like going back to a time where an expansion felt like an actual expansion that expanded how much content was there. There's not just stupid cosmetic items or loose ends that the developers neglected, like the garbage that you would get with a COD DLC, Skylanders DLC, or pretty much any other expansions Activision puts out. Nintendo's DLC is usually pretty good, and Battlefront is no exception. Now, yeah, as of now, not as it was with just Pack 1. See, that's kind of where things get tricky, because the whole expansion package is great, but when you break it down, one outshines the other by a significant margin. For $20 you get both, but I'll be honest, initially with the first rollout of DLC, I was very skeptical and disappointed. The first pack of DLC only really adds one substantial thing: the Trial of the Sword. Think of this like that enemy gauntlet in the Wind Waker. You go from floor to floor fighting a bunch of enemies that progressively get more difficult. Your inventory is taken away, which only ramps up the challenge since you have to start from scratch, having to collect a bunch of dinky weapons and any food you can to survive all the way until a certain checkpoint. Along that way, as you finish a certain set of floors, you power up the Master Sword until it reaches its fullest power level of 60 damage, making it one of the most powerful, resourceful weapons you can acquire. I like this portion of the DLC quite a bit. It reminded me of the Eventide Island challenge, which I felt was one of Breath's more challenging and enjoyable segments. I remember thinking that the island's quirks would make for a good dungeon concept, and I'm happy Nintendo went ahead and did exactly that. But for $10, hypothetically, it felt a tad bit lacking, especially since there's only 3 sets of floors that can be completed in about 2 or 3 hours. I still found the Trial of the Sword entertaining and thrilling, but this left me feeling a bit cheated, I suppose. I know you also had the addition of Master Mode. However, that mode just increased enemy health values, gave them more damage and regeneration buffs, and changed their colors. This didn't make the game more challenging, as it made the experience more of a bother. For me, having to just whittle down enemy health bars took too much time and didn't have the difficulty to compensate for it. I just had to spend more time dodging and preserving my weapons. This wasn't a test of skill, it was a test of patience and determination, which I personally didn't like. I wish that perhaps more different colored enemies could have been added, like a gold bokoblin or some other interesting enemy encounters. What about adding more enemies from the past in this mode to further the challenge? That would have been a neat addition if Master Mode had exclusive enemies. The one golden Lionel exists, but for that creature, it unfortunately follows in the same logic as before by just increasing health bars, having health gradually increase, and making attacks more powerful. What if this golden Lionel had some new ferocious attacks or a new sort of weapon? There's also some armor that are references to past installments, which is cool, I guess. I like that there's a Korok mask to detect nearby Koroks if you ever need some assistance. Still, it feels sort of lacking since these are just tiny aesthetic changes to Link. Furthering that, there's this travel medallion where you can plant your own fast travel points on the map as well as displaying Link's walking adventure and deaths on the map. These additions are fine. They work and they can provide a means of improving your gameplay experience or giving you some slight joy. To be included in a $10 DLC pack along with a decent enemy gauntlet is another story though. Pricing is a subjective thing, but I know personally I wanted a bit more out of the DLC after I got all the armor, finished the trial, and was left feeling a bit disappointed for 3 measly hours I seemingly wasted. That doesn't mean I didn't like it. By the contrary, I was having the same degree of fun as I had in my original playthrough. It's just that I wish that there was more substance. I didn't have high expectations for the next set of DLC. Boy, was I fucking wrong. The second pack of DLC for Breath of the Wild is the best DLC I've ever experienced. That's a hyperbole, but fuck it, it's amazing. For a hypothetically $10, you get around 7 or 8 hours of additional, compelling, very, very entertaining gameplay and story content. You get some more plot details about the champions, detailing their personalities, their motivations, and a taste of their backstories. The champions' Ballad expansion dives deep into what I felt was a pretty minimalist narrative and fleshes out some things the vanilla plot brushed past on its way to establish the hero's journey. Each champion gets quite a bit of screen time to interact with Zelda and the hero. You learn a lot about Rivali, Mipha, Daruk, Urbosa, and Zelda that you probably would have never known. I'm not going to do a deep analysis of the plot because I would rather have other people experience it firsthand, but these moments have some emotional weight to them. It's nothing mind-blowing, but truth be told, I did like the route they took Zelda's character. The writers spent a lot of time developing her by osmosis to the other champions, in a sense. Through these interactions, they become more dynamic rather than being just random archetypes of sacrificial heroic victims of a failed mission. Because you get to learn more about Mipha's motherly role and Urbosa's surprisingly deep, caring relationship with Zelda, you feel all the more sad when you think about their inevitable fate. It's like you're watching memories of these characters who you know didn't have the best ending. You know how their stories come to a close, and you feel some genuine emotional depth recognizing that. You, the player, know that these characters don't know they're going to die, so they seem oblivious to it all. They're optimistic and filled with hope. Hope that you know is immediately transformed into despair. You might call it cliche to develop characters in this manner that have some blind optimism in the face of an unstoppable evil, but I really loved it. I usually skip cutscenes in games because often plots are by the numbers and too simplistic for my tastes. Sure, Link still has to beat the baddie to save the day, but I enjoyed how the focus was on the characters, not the overall objective. I actually like this flashback-style storytelling, so maybe I'm biased, but it delivered an experience that forced me to think about the implications of the characters' choices and what their destinies turned out to be. The fact that this is also delivered by Cass, one of my favorite beings in Breath, makes it all the better. He's a bird fella that's just chillin', singing about the past, reminiscing about the song his master taught him. Cass gives the story more context. It makes sense why he'd be around telling the tale, which grounds the narrative more in a way. Putting aside these wonderful additional story details, the gameplay Pack 2 offers is complex and filled with so much to do. You start the Champion's Ballad by going around the Great Plateau with a weapon that murders in one slash, dubbed the One-Hit Obliterator, and you have to clear out a bunch of enemy bases with half a heart. As you can kill in one hit, you can also die in one hit. This raises the stakes significantly when fighting challenging enemies like the Lizalfos that can run really fast and kill you before you can even react to what's happening. It encourages you to really take your time and think about every option you have to clear out the enemies. You have to be very careful, and I know I utilized customized my bow quite a bit, especially by sort of cheesing it with the ancient arrows I had. It's surprisingly nerve-wracking to fight toe-to-toe with an enemy that's on equal footing to you. Enemies that can and will kill you any chance they get. My hands got so sweaty whenever a Lizalfos would come barreling towards me, and that's the level of fear I want to have in a game. Then when you clear out all the enemies, you have to overcome a shrine, which is made much more challenging with half a heart. These shrines, by the way, are among the best in the entire game. They test your mental abilities with solving puzzles and using all the Sheikah abilities in tandem with each other. Vanilla shrines were usually pretty easy to solve, and you'd tend to just use 1 or 2 runes in each. These shrines really demand quick critical thinking. There's some shrines where I had to look up the solutions out of frustration, something only the Witness has ever made me do. I'm not that dumb, but some of the puzzles gave me a hard time. I like this though. I really like the feeling of being physically and mentally perplexed. They were never unfair either. You're given adequate information and moves to conquer each. It's up to your mental capacity and skill to figure them out. The feeling of overcoming a seemingly immovable obstacle is so satisfying. If you love the shrines in the original game like I did, then you will adore the puzzles Butwa's DLC throws at you. Shrines later on are preceded by cryptic challenges and locations Kos gives you, all of which are reasonable and can be solved properly if you use your noggin. I know that for some I had to use a guide, but if you take the time to take pictures of where they are and survey the map, they're somewhat simple to find. Doing whatever Kos recommends is also effortless since your objective will be clearly marked by some blue rings or some description of what enemy you need to fight. The only one that was a bit of a headache to solve was during Mipha's ballad, where you have to paraglide to a specific spot at a specific time with seemingly no indication of what to do unless you really take the time to think hard about it. That being said, I'm glad that these locations weren't just given to you straight from the get-go and marked on your map as just another place to go to complete a mission. Not having the markers or any solid direction further added to Breath's philosophy of non-linear game design. Finding these areas and then watching as a shrine pops up is satisfying when you feel like you've jumped over these hurdles all on your own. I can understand why most might not like how vague Kos is, but I think the unclear direction adds to the charm. It's additionally narratively appropriate for the challenges to be this obscure. The context of the story and how Breath was envisioned sort of negate any complaint I would have with these tasks. Oh, and to add to the already hours upon hours of puzzles and that you have to go through to level up your champion powers, there's another divine beast you're tasked with beating. You can access the final divine beast by doing the aforementioned shrines and learning more about the champions. The existence of another divine beast sort of coaxes you into collecting all this background information about the characters and gives you a reason to be on this particular adventure. In comparison to the other dungeons, this divine beast is a lot more complicated, following in the aforementioned multi-variable design of the other shrines in this DLC. You have to use a bunch of different runes and the rotation of the divine beast to access all the terminals to enter the final chamber, where you face off against the most difficult boss in Breath of the Wild. This two-step fight requires you to use all your runes, all your powers, all your weapons, and all the skill you've built up to this point. It's super engaging and most of all, really fun. I wish there was more boss fights since I enjoyed this experience so much, but this is fine enough. As a reward for completing the Champion's Ballad, you're granted with the best rune ever. You get to ride a fucking motorcycle around Hyrule. I feel really bad for the horses since this is now the best way to get around. I can imagine if you did the DLC before completing the game, unlike me, this would add so much more entertainment when you inevitably face off against Ganon. Not to mention there's a bunch of new costumes and horse armor added, some of which are really cool like Ravio and the lobster shirt, giving the DLC Pack 2 that much more value. The second expansion blew my disappointment out of the water, and I feel bad I ever doubted the DLC would be good. You have to realize, for $20 you get both packs, and collectively, an additional 10 to 12 hours of play. That's a steal, considering most other DLC, priced around the same amount, adds significantly less and also a lot less quality stuff. For that amount of money, you get an entirely new, compelling character-based narrative, a fucking rad motorcycle, some powered-up abilities, a ton of new challenging puzzles, 2 new pseudo-dungeons, and a bunch of costumes from Zelda's past. Compare this to Destiny's lacking in dumb expansion. Compare this to Fallout 4's overpriced expansion. Compare this to any other modern DLC, and this one remains on the top of my list. It doesn't feel like the developers had to cover their tail by having to add more content locked behind a paywall because the original version had minimal content. It's an expansion that truly expands the scope of what Breath of the Wild has to offer. If you love Breath, get it. If you don't have Breath, buy it and buy the DLC with it. Don't wait for that price dropper sale that will never come. It's not necessary to get the most out of this nuanced, brilliant Zelda experience, but it will give you hours upon hours of new, fresh entertainment. I'm happy to see the DLC get rounded out with a second pack that gives you a tremendous quantity of gameplay and the such. Overall, the expansion pass did turn out to be worth it, and I'm happy my fears were squashed. Anyways, as always, if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, have a wonderful day, and bye!
You